Okay, so let's move on to the reading. My father's family name is Pirip, and my first name Philip. But as a child, I couldn't say either. So I called myself Pip, and then so did everyone else. I say that my name is Pirip because that's what is written on my father's tombstone, and it is what my sister told me. My sister is married to the blacksmith. We lived in a marshy area down by the river, a few miles from the sea. One day, I stood in the churchyard and looked over my parents' tombstone at the dark, flat wilderness beyond the churchyard. The marshes were crisscrossed with ditches and mounds. In the distance, I could see the grey line of the river, and then far away, the sea. It was a cold day. So basically, in these three paragraphs are telling us about this guy. His name is Philip. His first name is, and his family name is Pirip. But he's not sure that if the Pirip is actually his family's name. He just knows that that is the name that is written on the tombstone. But when he was a child, he couldn't pronounce Philip or Pirip, so he started calling himself Pip. And because he was calling himself Pip, everyone else started calling him Pip also. But then in the second paragraph, it says that it is his sister is married to a blacksmith, and that in the third paragraph that he's telling us about where he lives, and that he lives in a marshy area. Marshy area as in it's a very wet land. There are many small plants in that area, and it's basically very wet. The soil and the mud, it's very muddy, that area where he lives. And in this paragraph, he's just describing the area in which he lives. Now let's move on to the next page. The grey land and the grey sky made me feel sad. I suddenly realized that I was an orphan, and I began to cry. Hold your noise, cried a terrible voice. It came from a man who had just stepped out from behind a gravestone. Keep still, or I'll cut your throat. This man was frightening. He was dressed in rough grey clothes, and he had a big iron chain on his leg. He was an escaped convict. His shoes were broken, and he had an old rag tied around his head. He was dirty from being soaked in the muddy water from the ditches. He was covered in scratches from nettles and stones. He limped and shivered and glared and growled. His teeth chattered in his head as he seized me by the chin. Now, as we discussed earlier on page number 14 in the last paragraph, it's telling us that he was basically visiting his father's grave, and it was a very cold day. And the grey land and the grey sky, it was making him feel very sad because he realized that he was an orphan. He had no parents. So he started to cry. But when he started to cry, he heard a noise from behind him, and there was a man who was basically warning him that he'll cut his throat if he starts running. And then in this paragraph is describing how the man looked like. And it says that the man, he was dressed in rough grey clothes, and he had iron chain on his legs. You can see it in the picture. And he looked like a prisoner, an escaped convict, an escaped prisoner basically. And he looked like he was running from the prison because his shoes were broken, and there was an old rag on his head. You can see it in the picture. His clothes were all torn and dirty, and because of the ditches from the marsh. And you can also see scratches on his hands because of the weeds, the nettles. Okay, moving on to the reading. Oh, don't cut my throat, sir, I pleaded in terror. Tell me your name, said the man. Quick. Pip, sir. Once more, said the man, staring at me. Louder. Pip, sir. Show me where you live, said the man. Point out the place. I pointed to where our village lay, a mile from the church. The man looked at me closely. Then he turned me upside down and emptied my pockets. There was nothing in them but a piece of bread. The upside-down view of the church righted itself when he placed me on a high tombstone. I sat trembling while he ate the bread ravenously. Now, in this paragraph thingy, it tells us that the prisoner, the convict, he was warning Pip if he doesn't give him anything or if he doesn't tell his name to him, he's going to basically harm him. He asked his name, the boy told him his name, and then the convict, he asked where he lived, and he told him where he lives. He pointed at his house, and then the prisoner, he emptied Pip's pockets, and he took the food, the small piece of bread that was in the pocket of his trousers, and then he started eating it hungrily because, of course, he was a prisoner. He wasn't getting proper food. Moving on to the reading. "Now look here," said the man. "Where are your parents?" "There, sir," said I. The man jumped and made a short run, but then he stopped and looked over his shoulder. "There, sir," I timidly said, pointing to the tombstone. Now here, the prisoner asks Pip where his parents are, so Pip tells him that he points at the the tombstones where his parents' dead bodies lay, of course. And the prisoner, for a second, he became very scared because he thought that his parents were standing, behind him. But then he realized that he was just pointing at the tombstones. Let's move on to the reading. "Oh," said the man, "so who do you live with, if I let you live, which I haven't made up my mind about?" "My sister, sir, Mrs. Joe Gargery, wife of Joe Gargery, the blacksmith, sir." "Blacksmith, eh?" said he, and looked down at his leg. After looking at his leg and me several times, he took me by both arms and tilted me back as far as he could hold me. Then he stared into my eyes. "Now look here," he said. "I need to decide if I will let you live. Do you know what a file is?" "Yes, sir." "And you know what grub is?" "Yes, sir." After each question, he tilted me over a little more. This made me feel helpless. I was in danger. "You get me a file," he tilted me again. "And you get me grub," he tilted me again. "You bring them both to me," he tilted me again, "or I'll have your heart and liver out," he tilted me again. Now till here, the prisoner basically starts asking Pip about his whereabouts, that where he lives and who does he live with, because of course Pip just told him that his parents had died. So the Pip tells the prisoner that he lives with his sister and her husband, and he also tells the prisoner that his brother-in-law, he is a blacksmith. So when the prisoner hears that his brother-in-law is a blacksmith, he asks him to bring a file so that he could cut the iron chains on his leg. He could get free of these iron chains. And then he warns him that if he does not get him a file, which will help him cut the iron chain, and some grub is food, then he will, of course, harm him. Let's move on to the reading. "I was dreadfully frightened and hoped that he would not drop me. I clung to him with both hands. He dipped me backwards and rolled me round so that the church seemed to jump over its own weathercock. Then, still holding me up on the tombstone, he went on. 'Early tomorrow morning, bring that file and the grub. You bring the lot to me at that old battery over there. If you do it, you don't say a word about me. I will let you live. If you fail or say anything at all about me, then your heart and your liver shall be torn out, roasted and eaten. Now I am not alone. There's a young man hiding with me. In comparison with him, I am an angel.'" Now, in this paragraph, basically, Pip is telling us that he was very frightened because of the prisoner, because he was warning him that he's going to take out his heart and liver and he's going to roast it and eat it. So basically, he jumped down the tombstone because he was very scared of the prisoner. And then in this paragraph, in the last paragraph on this page, the prisoner is warning Pip, and he's also telling him where he has to bring these two things. and he's warning him that if he doesn't bring these two things, he's going to, kill him, and his liver and his heart will be roasted and eaten. But he says that if he does bring these things to the old battery, we just discussed in the words to know that battery means a fort. It's a building. So to the building, if he brings that file and the grub, the food, to the old battery, and if he doesn't tell anybody about him, he will let him live. And then he also warns him that there is another man, there's another prisoner with him, and he's hiding behind him, behind the fort. And he says that when you compare me to that prisoner, I am an angel. Okay, let's move on to the reading on page number 17. That young man can hear us now. That young man has a secret way of getting at a boy and at his heart and at his liver. A boy can't hide himself from that young man. A boy may lock his door, may be warm in bed, may tuck himself up, may draw the clothes over his head, may think himself comfortable and safe. But that young man will softly creep his way to him and tear him open. I am keeping that young man from harming you at the present moment with great difficulty. I find it very hard to hold that young man off of your side, inside. Now, what do you say? I was so frightened, but I said that I would get him the file, and I would get him what broken bits of food I could, and I would come to him at the battery early in the morning. Now, in these first two paragraphs, the prisoner is basically telling Pip about that man who can find the boy anywhere he would be, even if he's inside his bed and comfortable and safe. And he also tells Pip that that young man is hearing him right now, and he knows a secret way of getting at the boy. And in this paragraph, he says that because the prisoner is asking the man to hold back, that is why that man who is hiding, he's holding back, or he would have harmed him anyways. And because Pip was already frightened, he said that he would do everything that the prisoner is saying early in the morning. Now let's move back to the reading. Promise on your life, said the man. I promised, and he took me down from the top of the tombstone. Now, he went on, remember that promise, and remember that young man, and get home. Good night, sir, I stammered. It is going to be a long night for me, said he. He looked at the cold, wet, flat marsh. I wish I was a frog or an eel. He hugged his shuddering body in both his arms as if to hold himself together, and limped towards the low church wall. He got over it slowly, like a man whose legs were numbed and stiff, and then turned round to look for me. When I saw him turning, I was frightened again, and ran home without stopping. Now, in these 3 lines, the prisoner asks Pip to make a promise on his life that he would bring those things to him tomorrow. And then he also tells him that he has to remember his promise, he has to remember the young man who is hiding and who might harm him, and then he can go home. So he said, good night. And then because, of course, it was already raining and it was already wet, so the man said that the prisoner was saying that it's going to be a long night for him because, it was a cold, wet, flat marsh. So in the last paragraph, it tells us that, of course, it was a wet night, so he was hugging his body because he was shivering. He didn't have anything to cover his body. And then he slowly went away behind the church wall. He was limping. And Pip was so frightened that he started running and he didn't stop. He didn't even look back. And he was so frightened that he ran home without stopping.